The fallout surrounding the cancellation of Batgirl has been one of the most interesting things I've ever watched from this side of the pond. Just seeing all the reactions and actually seeing employees of Warner Brothers Discovery, working for DC Comics, calling the decision to cancel the film outright racist. I mean, that's the only reason it could have happened, when the preponderance of evidence supports that the decision to cancel the film and David Zaslav himself are not rooted in racism, but actual business sense. Well, ruthless business sense. David Zaslav has been on a mission. Before he ever took over Warner Brothers Discovery, before the merger happened, and we knew that Zaslav was going to be the guy in charge as the new CEO, he made abundantly clear two things. Number one, he's trying to save money. And number two, he's trying to create a better DCEU that can compete with the MCU and become this enormous billion-dollar movie franchise that will be an enormous revenue creator over the next 10 years. We know he's got a 10-year plan. You say, there is no evidence. I say you are insane. None of this is happening in a vacuum. There are all these other moving parts and decisions being made that actually support what I've said. You don't believe me? Let's talk about it. What is the first thing that David Zaslav did when he was in charge of Warner Brothers Discovery? He shut down CNN Plus after it had only been live for 1 month. CNN Plus actually cost $100 million to launch, and after only a month, he shut it down because he didn't see the long-term value of having CNN Plus. Now, you may say, well, maybe he just doesn't like left-wing politics. CNN certainly skews that way. Well, we have a more recent decision just happened this week. Warner Brothers Discovery divested their financial interest in a right-leaning UK TV news startup called GB News. This certainly suggests to me that he's not being partisan with any of this. He's looking for the best investment strategies possible to generate revenue. What else happened when they canceled the Batgirl movie? They also canceled the sequel to the Scoob movie that was supposed to come on HBO Max. Another project that cost $40 million to produce, and they're taking a tax write-off for that as well. Does this mean that David Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery secretly hate mystery-solving dogs and their stoner friends? Is that what this is saying? Or does this speak to a larger strategy implemented by David Zaslav to cut costs? Obviously, scrapping Batgirl also plays into his bigger vision for the DCEU moving forward. We'll talk about that here in a few seconds. But there are other events happening around Warner Brothers Discovery when it comes to HBO and HBO Max. They just laid off 70 people. This is the initial round of layoffs following the Warner Brothers Discovery merger. And they targeted HBO and HBO Max first. It appears David Zaslav did not like the direction and the strategic approach being taken with HBO Max moving forward, and they're changing things up a bit. And that makes sense, because if you look at the subscriber base of HBO Max in comparison to its peers, Amazon Prime Video, Netflix, Disney Plus, it is far, far behind because their strategy thus far hasn't worked. But it's not just that. They also canceled essentially all scripted shows, reportedly, at TNT and TBS, electing to go with sports coverage, non-scripted television, and shows that they can put on that are in syndication. And despite the overwhelming evidence supporting that David Zaslav is not coming to these decisions based on race or ethnicity or some type of hate for a group here or there, but it's only a ruthless look at the bottom line and the future of what he sees for Warner Brothers Discovery moving forward when it comes to their movie studios, their franchise management, cable, streaming, video games, all these things that he's taking a new approach on and looking to cut $3 billion while creating a new strategic vision for the DCEU moving forward. And somehow we've gotten to this place where this whole cabal of hipster doofus losers that are just waiting to take pot shots at David Zaslav and call him vile, disgusting names because he canceled the Batgirl movie. This is what an actor who appeared in a minor role in the film who reached out to IndieWire and requested anonymity had to say. I am very offended by what happened and feel terrible for the directors and Leslie Grace, who were all wonderful to work with, as well as all the technicians. It was an enormous, rewarding challenge to make this movie during COVID and during the cold weather in Glasgow. None of these things matter to an imbecile like Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav. His cowardice is breathtaking. I am glad I got to participate, and I wish the best for all those involved, except the suits at Warner Brothers, but they all get replaced sooner than later. Listen, I get why anyone involved in the production of the Batgirl movie would be upset. Principal photography was done. It was in post-production. They were screening it for people. Unfortunately, the response to those test screenings were very, very negative. In fact, there were anonymous sources within Warner Brothers that said the Batgirl movie was irredeemable. and that was going to do irreparable harm to the DCE moving forward. Do you think David Zaslav, with his stated goals, number one, saving money, number two, finding a new direction, a successful direction to challenge the MCU moving forward, wanted to put out a movie tied to Batman that was going to be terrible? And we've heard some spoilers about what happens in that movie that we'll never see. Apparently, Michael Keaton shows up and he dies in the end. And essentially, Leslie Grace's Batgirl kind of takes over as the Batman role. That was a terrible idea. We'd heard those rumors before and we laughed at them. Anybody, not just David Zaslav, could have seen that direction and said, that is probably the worst approach we could ever take with the DCEU. Batman is the backbone of the DCEU. Superman might be the foundation, but Batman is the real mover and shaker. That is the character everyone comes and sees. And I wish I could say I was surprised to hear this from Kevin Smith, who's been in the industry and was hired by HBO Max to work on one of their DC-related projects. Speaking on his YouTube series Hollywood Babylon, this is what Kevin Smith had to say. It's an incredibly bad look to cancel the Latina Batgirl movie. You'll notice in his words, it's not the Batgirl movie, it's the Latina Batgirl movie. He continues, I don't give a shit if the movie was absolute effing dog shit. I guarantee you that it wasn't. The two directors who directed that movie did a couple of episodes of Miss Marvel, and it was a wonderful effing show, and they had more money to do Batgirl than they had to do an episode of Miss Marvel and stuff. You'll notice, in Kevin Smith's opinion, it's not a bad look that they canceled a DC film that they spent $90 million on. It's important, and it's a bad look because they canceled a Latina movie in the DC extended universe. That's the real problem here because, right, David Zaslav's a racist, despite all the evidence that says otherwise. It just says he's a ruthless businessman that has a specific vision for what he thinks is the future of Warner Brothers Discovery. Now, is it a bad look that the Blue Beetle, which is also starring a Latino character and actor, which was originally developed for HBO Max, but when they saw how good the project was, they gave it a bigger budget and said this one's going to the big screen? What about that decision? Was that a bad look? Because it doesn't sound like everybody associated with Warner Brothers Discovery are raging racists. And then the other projects that David Zaslav specifically pointed out, saying that he stood behind, that he thought had really good legs and were going to do good things for the DCE moving forward. The Flash, which it looks like they might have to scrap, not because he wants to. Apparently Zaslav thinks there's real quality there, but all the issues with Ezra Miller might not allow them to put that movie out, but he stood behind it. Ezra Miller identifies as non-binary. Apparently, David Zaslav was willing to stand behind a film starring a gender-fluid person. It sounds like a lot of his decisions are based in quality, not the race or sex or gender of the people in charge. Well, what about his Black Adam movie that they're very excited about? That one stars Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Father is African-American, mother is Pacific Islander. So it doesn't feel to me, when you look at all the decisions that have been made by David Zaslav, beginning with the CNN cut, all the way to his decision to divest their financial interest in this new startup in the UK, and everything that happened in between, are not in fact motivated by racism, but simply an understanding of his bottom line and what he sees as the future of Warner Brothers Discovery. A bad movie, apparently a terrible movie, irredeemable, like Batgirl, was not going to be on the docket for the future of the DCEU. They don't want to put out any more bad movies. They don't want to put out any more Birds of Prey movies or Batman v Superman or the Justice League. They don't want any more embarrassments. They're going to keep closer tabs on it. Am I excited about all these changes and what I think is going to happen with Zaslav in charge? Absolutely not. I think something needed to happen. But as I've mentioned, he's a ruthless businessman. He's not an entertainer. He's not a creative person. So I think we're going to get less interesting movies that are going to be much more cookie cutter in the future from the DCEU, but something had to happen because they were taking so many stupid chances that inevitably somebody like David Zaslav would have to come in and clean up all this mess. But the idea that he's a racist, I think, is just absolutely insane. Saying that these decisions are based on race, the information that we have does not support that claim, and I think I've made a pretty good argument. Obviously, there are many more things that have happened over the past 3-4 months that support it even further, but I didn't want to go into everything. I think those examples speak for themselves, but it didn't stop employees of David Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery from calling him racist. I talked about it earlier. Aaron Sparrow and I, good friend of the channel, comic book writer, editor, he also wrote an episode of Young Justice for HBO Max. We had a conversation about how Heather Antos and Vita Ayala were popping off of the mouth saying really mean things about David Zaslav, which don't make sense if you actually look at the facts. Definitely check this one out. And if you're on a mobile device, I know it's not shown up here, there's a link in the video description if you want to check it out.